Hello, my name is Amelia Thompson, and I'm 26 years old. The story I'm about to share with you began in a kitchen in Westlake, Texas, when I was 18 years old, holding an acceptance letter that would change everything. It's a story about the price of following your dreams when the people who are supposed to love you most tell you those dreams are worthless. But it's also about what happens when you prove them spectacularly wrong. What are you destroying your life for? Pretty pictures? My father's voice cut through the kitchen air like a blade. I stood there, hands trembling, holding my acceptance letter from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, thinking this would be the moment they finally saw my potential. Instead, my mother crossed her arms and shook her head as if I had just announced I was joining a cult. "We won't pay for your useless degree," my father continued, his voice rising. "You want to play with paint? Do it as a hobby, but we're not funding your fantasies." Something inside me broke completely that night. And 4 years later, when they saw my latest painting sell for $2,100,000 on the local news, their desperate voicemails made me laugh out loud. If you've ever been told by your family that you're wasting your life pursuing your dreams, please stay with me until the end. You'll see exactly what happened when I made my parents pay for their words, both financially and emotionally. In my memory, my parents measured success with one currency: money in the bank, preferably from respectable careers. My father, Richard, was a certified public accountant at a mid-sized firm in Austin, Texas, specializing in real estate transactions. He rose every morning at 6 o'clock, put on the same gray suit, and drove his Honda Accord to the office, where he would remain until 7 in the evening. My mother, Linda, was a registered nurse at San Antonio Regional Hospital, working 12-hour shifts in the intensive care unit, dealing with life-and-death situations. They had met at Austin Community College, both pursuing practical degrees. Dad studied accounting, Mom studied nursing. They both came from blue-collar families with parents who worked in factories and held an almost religious belief in the value of education. But only a certain type of education. The kind that guaranteed employment. The kind that paid bills. The safe kind. They bought an 1,800-square-foot house in Westlake, an upper-middle-class suburb of Austin where houses had perfectly manicured front lawns, 2 cars in every garage, and 10-year plans on every kitchen counter. Our neighbors included other accountants, nurses, engineers, and teachers. All safe careers, all predictable lives. My parents weren't cruel people. They were fear-driven people. They had come of age during the economic recessions of the late 80s and early 90s, watching people with artistic dreams lose their houses, seeing musicians and painters still working in coffee shops at 50, waiting for their big break that never came. They had seen the consequences of pursuing impractical dreams and sworn to protect their daughter from the same fate. Their love was conditional, based on my ability to conform to their need for safety and stability. Every time I showed interest in art, they would gently guide me toward more practical directions. When I was 8 years old, I drew a portrait of our neighbor's golden retriever, Max, so lifelike that Mrs. Chen, a retired art professor, offered to pay me $20 for it. I remember that rush of excitement, realizing I might actually have something special. I ran home, bursting with pride, ready to show my parents that I could make money with art. "Very nice, dear," my mother said, not lifting her eyes from her nursing journal, a professional publication she had to read to maintain her certification. "But you can't build a career on drawing dogs. Perhaps you could use art as a skill for medical illustration." My father was more direct, looking up from his tax documents. "Art is what people do when they can't do anything else. Really smart people use their talents for meaningful work." For years, I believed them. I internalized the belief that my love of beauty, my urge to create, my ability to capture light and shadow on paper was nothing more than a charming hobby, best saved for weekends. In elementary school, I excelled at mathematics, particularly geometry, where I could visualize complex shapes in my mind. My parents seized on this, pushing me into math competitions where I frequently placed first or second. They covered my bedroom walls with my awards, but never my artwork. "Look how smart she is," my mother would tell guests, pointing to my math trophies. "She's going to make an excellent engineer." In middle school, I won science fairs with projects about how light travels through different mediums, driven by my fascination with how light worked in paintings. My parents began talking about medical school. "If she's already this interested in science," my father would say, "imagine what she'll accomplish in medical school." By high school, when I scored highest in my advanced placement biology class, they started leaving medical school brochures on the living room coffee table. Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Baylor College of Medicine, all spread out like shining bait, trying to lure me onto the path they had chosen for me. But at night, when they thought I was studying calculus or preparing for the SAT, I was painting. My bedroom became a secret gallery. I hid my artwork under my bed, stuffed it in my closet, rolled it up in my desk drawers. I painted landscapes of the rolling hills of Texas Hill Country, how the Austin skyline looked at sunset. I painted portraits of my classmates, my teachers, sometimes myself, exploring who I was beneath the mask I had to wear during the day. I created abstract works that expressed all the emotions I had to suppress in my role as the perfect daughter. Art was the only place I could be honest. There, I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to be safe. I didn't have to conform to someone else's expectations of who I should become. I could create something beautiful that had value simply because it existed, not because it could make money or make my parents feel secure. But I never let my parents see those paintings. I knew what they would say. I could imagine my mother's expression, that patient but firm smile she used when talking to delirious patients in the ICU. I could hear my father's sigh, the one he made when clients told him they wanted to make reckless investments. So I stayed silent, living in a strange, double existence. By day, I was the perfect daughter, the dutiful student, the reason for my parents' pride, the girl everyone said would have a brilliant future. By night, I was the artist, the person who created by candlelight, who caught dreams and shadows when the world was asleep. During high school, I kept art as my deepest secret. I took all the business courses they wanted: accounting introduction, business math, economics. I applied to pre-medical programs at the University of Texas and Texas A&M. I painted in my bedroom after they went to sleep, using a flashlight, as if I were doing something illegal. But everything changed in my senior year when my art teacher, Miss Carmen Rodriguez, pulled me aside. Miss Rodriguez was that rare kind of teacher who actually cared about her students as whole people, not just test scores. She was about 45, with graceful salt and pepper hair, and always wore flowing scarves with paint stains. She had been a professional artist in New York, with a studio in Soho, until she fell in love with a Texan and moved to Austin to raise their 2 children. Her classroom didn't look like the rest of the school. The walls were covered with her paintings, not student work, but real professional art. There were landscapes she had painted on the banks of the Seine in Paris, emotional portraits of former boyfriends, and abstract works that explored light and color in ways I had never seen. The room always smelled of turpentine and acrylic paint, that scent only real art studios have. I had taken her advanced placement art class, mainly because I needed an art credit to graduate, and my parents thought it was a safe choice. "At least it might teach you something about color," my mother had said. "That could be useful for medical illustration." But when Miss Rodriguez first saw my work, she stopped everything she was doing. "Amelia," she said, looking at the still life I had created for the midterm assignment. A hyper-realistic charcoal drawing of pears, apples, and an old glass bottle. Where have you studied painting before? I haven't, I said, suddenly frightened. Did I do something wrong? She laughed, but it was a laugh of surprise, not mockery. Wrong, Amelia? This is some of the best technical work I've seen from a high school student. You have talent. Real talent. That moment felt like someone had suddenly turned on lights in a dark room I had been living in. Someone, a real artist, someone who had made a living at this, saw my work and said it was good. Not just nice for a hobby or good for a high school student, but really good. From that day forward, Miss Rodriguez became my mentor. She had me stay after school, teaching me techniques she had learned in New York. She showed me how to mix colors to get exactly the shade I wanted, how to create texture with paper towels and fingers, how to capture the light in someone's eye to make a portrait look alive. Art isn't about copying what you see, she would say when I got frustrated because a painting couldn't exactly match a photograph. Art is about conveying what you feel. Cameras can copy reality. Artists interpret it. She also told me about the art world, not the starving artist world my parents imagined, but the real professional art world. She told me about galleries, about collectors, about how successful artists built careers. She showed me contemporary art magazines with stories of young artists selling works and gaining critical recognition. There's a misconception that you can't make a living from art, she told me. It's not true. Difficult? Yes. Impossible? Absolutely not. But it requires a combination of talent, dedication, and business sense. You have the talent, you have the dedication. The business side can be learned. I began to imagine a different life. I began to dream of a world where I didn't have to hide who I was. In the spring, Miss Rodriguez showed me something I had been working on all semester under her guidance, a large, surrealistic cityscape. The painting showed a distorted version of my hometown Austin, with buildings melting into organic shapes and a sky filled with impossible colors. It was a visual metaphor for all my dreams and frustrations, a world that looked familiar, but was fundamentally changed. Amelia, she said, holding up the finished painting. This is gallery-quality work. Have you considered art school? The idea terrified and thrilled me equally. Art school? I didn't even know that was a real option. My parents had never mentioned it. My college counselor had never mentioned it. In my world, college meant the University of Texas or Texas A&M, meant pre-med or business or engineering. But that night, I started researching. I learned about Parsons School of Design, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, the Savannah College of Art and Design. I saw galleries of student work, read success stories of graduates becoming professional artists. I discovered an entire world I never knew existed. Then I did one of the bravest things of my life. I secretly applied to 3 art schools. I had to lie to do it. I told my parents I was applying to backup schools in case I didn't get into the University of Texas. I used a false name on my portfolio submissions. I didn't want any trail leading back to me before my parents accidentally discovered it. I paid the application fees with money I had saved from part-time jobs. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I was the first to the mailbox every day. The envelope from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago was thick. My hands shook as I tore it open. Dear Miss Thompson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I stood in our driveway, holding that letter, realizing my life had just split into 2 paths. One path led to the safe, predictable future my parents had planned for me. The other led to the unknown, frightening, uncertain, but real future. I hid the letter for 3 weeks, reading it hundreds of times, trying to work up the courage to tell my parents. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be a fight, but I didn't know it would completely end our relationship. The day I finally worked up the courage to tell my parents became the day our relationship completely broke. It was a typical Texas evening in April, temperature still in the 80s, humidity in the air from the spring rain that was coming. Our central air was humming, trying to fight against the oppressive heat of a Texas spring. Dad had just come home from his office in downtown Austin, sweat stains on his white shirt collar, his suit wrinkled, the mark of a long day under the Texas sun. Mom had just returned from a night shift at the hospital, still wearing her scrubs, her face bearing the fatigue of dealing with life and death situations for 12 hours. She was preparing her famous chicken casserole, the creamy rice casserole she brought to our church potluck dinners, the one everyone always asked for the recipe. The kitchen was filled with the smell of sautéing onions and seasoning chicken, the sense of my home, of safety and normalcy. It all felt so familiar, so safe, so predictable. Our daily routine. Dad reading the Austin American-Statesman at the kitchen table. Mom busy at the stove. Me supposed to be upstairs doing homework, studying for upcoming AP exams. Then I pulled the acceptance letter from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago from my backpack. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands were shaking, my mouth was dry as a desert. I knew I was about to change everything. I knew there was no going back. But I also knew I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't continue living in this double existence, split between my parents' expectations and my own dreams. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "I need to tell you something." Dad looked up from his newspaper. Mom turned away from the stove, wooden spoon still in her hand. They both looked at me standing in the kitchen doorway, holding an official-looking envelope. "What is it, honey?" Mom asked, her nursing instincts kicking in. She probably thought I was pregnant, or on drugs, or in some kind of trouble. If only she knew what the reality would be like. I took a deep breath and said the words that changed everything. "I've been accepted to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago." Silence filled the kitchen, thick and oppressive. Outside, I could hear our neighbor's lawnmower, children playing in the street, the sounds of everyday suburban life. But inside our kitchen, time seemed to stop. Mom blinked as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "What?" "The School of the Art Institute of Chicago," I repeated, holding the letter higher. "I applied, and they accepted me. Full scholarship." Dad slowly put down his newspaper, folding it neatly, something he did when he was angry, arranging things neatly and carefully, as if controlling his environment could help him control his emotions. "Art school?" His voice was ice-cold calm, which was a danger sign. I knew that voice. It was the voice he used when explaining to clients that they had made huge financial mistakes. "When did you apply to art school?" "A few months ago," I admitted. "I wanted to have options." Mom began to understand what was happening, and her expression changed from confusion to panic. "But you're going to the University of Texas. You're going to study pre-medicine. We've discussed this. We've planned this." "You've planned this," I corrected, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. "I never said I wanted to be a doctor." Dad stood up, his composure beginning to crack. "Do you know how much student debt you'll take on for a degree that won't find you a job?" "I got a full scholarship," I said again. "It won't cost anything." Mom laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was a desperate, angry laugh, the laugh of a woman realizing her carefully laid plans were falling apart before her eyes. Scholarship? Amelia, having talent in something and making a living from it are two different things. You can't feed yourself with art. You can't buy a house with art. You can't raise a family with art. "I'm talented at this," I said, my voice starting to shake but still determined to continue. "Really talented. Miss Rodriguez says—" "Miss Rodriguez?" Dad almost spat the name. That high school art teacher? That woman who probably can't make a living from art herself? That's who you're getting life advice from? She was a professional artist in New York, I defended her, feeling a spark of anger ignite in my chest. She knows what she's talking about. Listen, Dad said, walking to the kitchen table and pulling a stack of papers from a folder. These were documents I knew well. My college savings account statements, his retirement plans, our family budget. He always had numbers to support his arguments. We've saved $50,000 for your education. Real education, business degree, medical degree, engineering degree, something with a future, something with job security. Art has a future, I started to say. For 1 in a million people, he interrupted, his voice now rising. For those lucky enough, or connected enough, or fortunate enough to be born into wealthy families. What makes you think you're special? What makes you think you'll be the one who succeeds? The words hit me like physical blows. What made me think I was special? I looked at my father, this man who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was smart, I was talented, I could achieve anything I set my mind to, now telling me I was foolish to believe in myself. I have a portfolio, I said, desperately trying to make them understand. I have teacher recommendations. Schools don't give people full scholarships unless they want your money in their system, Dad said coldly. Art schools are businesses, Amelia. They make money by convincing naive kids to become artists. Then those kids graduate with debt and skills they can't use in the real world. I looked at my parents, my father, a hard-working man who had been taught from childhood that dreams were luxuries, my mother, a woman who had buried her own creative aspirations on the altar of practicality, and I realized they couldn't see me. They saw projections of their own fears. They saw everything they had been taught to fear: risk, uncertainty, the possibility of pursuing something that didn't guarantee safety. Mom walked toward me, tears in her eyes, reaching out as if she was going to comfort me. Honey, we love you. That's why we're trying to protect you from this mistake. We've seen what happens to people who believe they can become artists. We don't want that to happen to you. But I stepped back because I suddenly understood what was happening. This wasn't about love. This was about control. This was about their need for me to be the antidote to their fears and insecurities. You know what? I said, my voice suddenly calm despite my heart racing wildly in my chest. Fine. Keep your money. I'll figure it out myself. Amelia, Mom started to say, panic now hitting her with full force. No, I said, already turning toward my room. You want to know what makes me think I'm special? The fact that I'm willing to believe in myself when my own parents won't? That makes me special. I could hear them arguing behind me, their voices following me up the stairs. Mom saying we needed to talk about this. We needed to find a compromise. Dad saying I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But I had already made my decision. In my room, I started packing. I pulled out my suitcase, the same one we had used last summer when we visited Texas A&M, and started filling it with clothes. I packed my art supplies, the brushes, pencils, and sketchbooks I had slowly collected over the years from part-time jobs. I packed my laptop, a few of my favorite books, and a framed photo of me and Dad, taken when I was still small, before we realized how different our visions for my future were. And most importantly, I packed my art. I rolled up every painting, every drawing, every piece I had created in secret over the years. This was my real portfolio. This was my proof that I wasn't just a naive kid with unrealistic dreams. I was an artist. That night, I applied for student loans, contacted the financial aid office at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and started researching work-study programs. I found student housing options, looked up bus schedules from Chicago to Texas, and calculated the minimum amount I would need to relocate to a new city. My phone rang all night, texts and voicemails from my parents, begging me to come downstairs. Let's talk about this. Let's find a way to work this out. But I didn't want a solution. I wanted freedom. 3 months later, on a sweltering August morning, I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, past the kitchen where I had grown up, past the same table where my parents and I had just had the conversation that changed our relationship. Dad was standing by the front door, his face bearing an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of anger, sadness, and something else I couldn't identify. "When you realize we were right," he said, his voice low and hurt, "don't come crying to us." Mom was crying, but she didn't try to stop me. I think she knew that if she did, I might never forgive her. I walked out of that door, dragging my suitcase along the same sidewalk where I had grown up, toward the taxi waiting to take me to the bus station. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had, I might have changed my mind. I might have gone back, accepted the safety they offered, and locked my dreams away forever. But as the taxi turned the corner, I did glance back. I could see the roof of our house, see my bedroom window, the place where I had spent so many nights painting and dreaming. Now it felt like another person's life. On the bus, as the Texas landscape rolled past the window, I took out my sketchbook and started drawing. I drew a young woman sitting on a bus, looking out the window, her face bearing an expression of fear and excitement. I drew someone escaping from one world and heading toward another. I didn't know what was waiting for me. I didn't know if I would succeed. I didn't know if I would regret this decision. But I knew that for the first time I was being true to myself. That had to be enough. Chicago was brutal in October. I thought I had prepared for Midwest weather, but Texas heat hadn't prepared me at all for the icy wind off Lake Michigan that cut across my face like knives, reminding me how far from home I was, how difficult the path I had chosen would be. But more difficult was the emotional isolation. Many of my classmates came from wealthy families who viewed art school as an expensive hobby, an opportunity to explore their creativity before they would find a real job. For them, this was an experiment. For me, this was my entire future. When I tried to explain to them why I was here, that I had severed ties with my family, that I had invested everything I had, they would nod sympathetically, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. Why would anyone give up safety for art? Why would anyone choose this struggle? I began to question myself. Sitting alone in my dorm room, eating my third consecutive ramen noodle dinner, I would wonder if my parents were right. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I had overestimated my talent. Maybe I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Then, every few days, I would receive texts from Texas. "Mom, Amelia, we're worried about you. Please call us." "Mom, the weather forecast says it's snowing in Chicago. Do you have warm clothes?" "Dad, your University of Texas application is still valid. It's not too late to change your mind." "Mom, I made your favorite chicken casserole. I wish you were here." "Dad, we saw an article about employment rates for art school graduates. We just want what's best for you." Each message was a needle poking at my resolve. They never said, "We were wrong," or "We're proud of you." It was always, "We're worried," and "It's not too late to come back," and "We know what's best for you." As if my struggle proved their point, as if every challenge I faced was proof that I should give up and come home. I stopped responding. It was too painful. My work suffered during the first year. I was trying to create what I thought my professors wanted to see, trying to mimic styles I saw in art magazines, trying to fit into what I thought a real artist was supposed to be. The result was generic, soulless work that lacked anything that had made my early work special. "Your technique is solid," my painting professor, Professor Johnson, told me during midterm reviews. "But where are you? I don't see you in these paintings. I see someone trying to be someone else." He was right. I knew he was right. But I didn't know how to find myself. I felt like I had lost whatever made me different, whatever made my art special. I began to doubt if I had ever had it, or if it was just a story I told myself to justify leaving home. Christmas break was especially difficult. Most students went home to their families, but I couldn't afford a plane ticket, and even if I could, I wasn't sure I would be welcome. I stayed alone in the nearly empty dormitory with a few international students and others like me who had nowhere to go. I spent Christmas Eve in my dorm room, eating a microwave dinner, watching snow fall outside my window. I took out my sketchbook and started drawing. Not for class, not for anyone, just to draw. I drew a young woman sitting alone in a small room, surrounded by art supplies and unfinished canvases. I drew loneliness, but I also drew determination. I drew someone who had chosen the hard path, even if it meant walking alone. When I looked at the finished sketch, I realized it was the best thing I had created in months. Not because of technique, although the technique was good, but because it was true. It was my experience, my emotion, my truth. That night, I decided to stop trying to be someone else. I was going to start being myself. But the moment that really changed everything happened in my sophomore year when I met Professor Marilyn Williams. Professor Williams was a legend at the art school. She was about 60 years old, with silver hair and always dressed in black, with bold silver jewelry. She had exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Her paintings were in important private collections, and she had worked with some of the most important artists of the 20th century. She was also known for being demanding. Legend had it that she had made students cry leaving her classroom. Her critiques of mediocre work were brutal, and she had no patience for anyone she felt wasn't taking art seriously. Most students were afraid of her. I was fascinated by her. I managed to get into her advanced portrait painting class, one of the most difficult courses to get into at the school. On the first day, she walked around the room, looking at work we had brought from the past year. When she reached my work, including that sketch I had drawn Christmas night, she stopped. She stood there looking for a long time, not speaking. The other students in the room stopped talking, watching her study my work. I could feel my face reddening, my palms sweating. I was sure she was going to publicly criticize me, tear apart my work in front of the whole class. Instead, she looked at me and said 6 words that changed my life. "You have something most people don't." After class, she asked me to stay. "Tell me your story," she said, sitting in a worn leather chair in her office, her own paintings hanging on the walls. I told her everything. I told her about my family in Texas, about my parents' opposition, about that night in the kitchen that had completely changed our relationship. I told her about the loneliness, about questioning myself, about wondering if I had made a huge mistake. She listened carefully, occasionally nodding, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. "You know," she finally said, "the best art comes from pain. Not pain itself, but the transformation of pain. Pain into meaning, pain into beauty. You have pain, Amelia. The question is what you're going to do with it." She stood up and walked to one of her paintings, a large abstract work full of angry reds and deep blues. "I painted this after my father died," she said. "He never understood my art. He thought it was a waste of time, just like your parents. He wanted me to become a secretary or a nurse. Safe things. We never reconciled before he died. This painting was my mourning process. It was my way of forgiving him and myself." She turned to me. "Your work has a raw emotional intensity that most artists spend years trying to cultivate. You don't need to cultivate it. You need to refine it. You need to learn how to channel that pain, not be consumed by it." From that day forward, Professor Williams became my mentor, but not in the gentle, encouraging way Miss Rodriguez had been. Professor Williams pushed me, challenged me, refused to let me settle for good enough. "You have talent," she would say, "but talent isn't enough. Chicago is full of talented artists. New York is full of talented artists. The world doesn't need another talented artist. It needs an important artist. She taught me to see my work not just as personal expression, but as communication with an audience. She taught me how to use my technique to serve my vision, not to show off for its own sake. Most importantly, she taught me how to transform my pain, my estrangement from my family, my struggle, my loneliness, into something universal. The best art, she told me, tells a specific story but touches universal truths. Your story of family rejection isn't just your story. It's the story of anyone who has ever had to choose between others' expectations and their own dreams. It's the story of anyone who has ever felt like an outsider. It's the story of anyone who has ever had to fight to become themselves. Under her guidance, I began creating a series about the theme of family expectations. These weren't literal portraits, but emotional landscapes, showing figures bent under the weight of expectations, people overshadowed by others' dreams for them, struggling to break free from identities that didn't fit them. I painted a young woman sitting at a table, surrounded by bills, college brochures, and other people's plans for her future. While her true interests, paintbrushes, sketchbooks, tubes of paint, spilled over the edge of the table onto the floor. I painted a person at a crossroads, one path wide, safe, with clear signs, the other narrow, rocky, but leading to beautiful, unknown places. I painted conversations at family dinner tables, but not with words, but with shapes and colors, the sharp angles of expectations colliding with the fluid curves of dreams. Each painting was an aspect of my own experience, but the techniques Professor Williams taught me made them universal. They began to resonate with others, not just art students, but anyone who had ever felt misunderstood, undervalued, or forced to live someone else's life. In the spring, Professor Williams suggested I apply for a student exhibition at a local gallery. It was a small but respected space in Chicago that specialized in emerging artist work. "You're ready," she said. "Your work has something to say. Now it's time for the world to listen." I submitted 3 paintings from my series. A month later, I received a phone call. The gallery wanted to exhibit my work. On opening night, I stood in the gallery watching people gather around my paintings. I heard conversations, not just about technique or composition, but about emotion, about recognition, about seeing themselves reflected in the work. An elderly woman approached me. "Are you the artist?" she asked. When I nodded, she said, "I want you to know that this painting," she pointed to the one I had painted of the family dinner table scene, "reminded me of my relationship with my daughter. We haven't spoken in years because I didn't understand her choices. Seeing this, I think I'm starting to understand. I think I need to call her." At that moment, I realized Professor Williams was right. The power of art wasn't just in expressing yourself, but in connecting others, in helping people feel less alone, in transforming personal struggles into shared understanding. 3 paintings sold that night, each for $2,000. For most people, that might not seem like much, but for me, it was proof that I might actually be able to make a living doing what I loved. I cried in the gallery bathroom, not from joy, though I was happy, but from relief. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't deceiving myself. I wasn't a naive kid with unrealistic dreams. I was an artist, and I had something important to say, but I knew this was just the beginning. I knew the real challenge was still ahead. My junior year marked the turning point in my art career. Professor Williams' guidance, combined with the confidence boost from my first gallery sales, began to create a compound effect. My work became more ambitious, my vision clearer, my confidence in my identity as an artist stronger. I began getting attention from the Chicago art community. The success of my student exhibition led to other opportunities, small exhibitions in local coffee shops and restaurants, participation in group shows, occasional commissioned work. It wasn't much, but enough for me to begin seeing a path forward. In the spring, a collector from downtown, Marcus Chen, visited our student studios. Marcus was one of those people, about 40 years old, always wearing perfectly fitted suits, driving a Tesla, with an eye that could instantly spot potential in a piece of art. He had discovered several artists who were now exhibiting internationally in galleries. When he entered my studio, he stopped in front of a painting I was working on. It was a new piece in my series, a complex composition showing a young woman standing in front of a broken mirror, each mirror fragment reflecting different expectations for her life: doctor, accountant, nurse, traditional wife, and mother. But in the center of the mirror, in the space between all the fragments, her true self was visible. Paint on her hands, dreams in her eyes. "Is this your work?" he asked, his voice carrying a professional interest that made my stomach nervous. "Yes," I answered, trying to stay calm. He studied the painting for 5 minutes without speaking. Then he began asking questions about my process, about my inspiration, about how I saw this series developing. He didn't talk about art like art students, or even most professors. He talked about it like a businessman, but a businessman who truly understood the value of art. "You have something interesting," he finally said. "Your technique is solid, but more importantly, you have a voice. You have something to say." He pulled a business card from his wallet. "I'd like you to consider a solo exhibition at my gallery. We can discuss details, but I think you're ready to take the next step." I stared at the business card, barely believing this was real. A real gallery, not a student space, not a coffee shop, but an actual professional gallery. "I need to see more work," he continued, "at least 12 to 15 paintings centered around this theme. They can be mixed media, they can be different sizes, but they need to work together as a unified statement. Do you think you can do that in 6 months?" She replied the next day, "Dear Amelia, I never doubted you would succeed. You had something special, not just talent, but tenacity. Keep creating beautiful art. The world needs your voice." But I still wasn't ready to contact my parents. I knew what they would say. They would say, "Okay, you sold some paintings, but that doesn't mean you can build a career." They would point out that my income was still unstable, my future still uncertain. They would be kind, but they wouldn't understand. I needed more proof. I needed success that they couldn't deny or dismiss. I needed to do something that would force them to take me seriously. Senior year is crucial for any art student, but for me, it felt like my entire future hung in the balance. I knew I had talent. I knew I was getting some recognition, but I also knew the reality of graduating from art school. Most graduates end up working in restaurants, or teaching art classes, or abandoning art entirely to pursue more stable careers. I was determined not to become one of those statistics. I spent the fall preparing for my solo exhibition in the spring. Marcus had given me the gallery's main space, 3 rooms that could accommodate about 20 works. This was a major opportunity, but also a major risk. If the exhibition failed, if the work didn't sell, if the reviews were bad, it could be difficult to recover. I decided to create my most ambitious work yet. Margaret helped me find a small studio apartment in Brooklyn, 500 square feet of space in a converted warehouse that cost 3 times what I had paid in Chicago, but with enough room for painting and enough light for working. The building was full of artists, musicians, and writers, all struggling to make their dreams come true. The New York art world was unlike anything I had experienced before. In Chicago, I had been a promising student with some local recognition. In New York, I was one of thousands of artists trying to make it. The competition was fierce, the standards impossibly high, and rejection was part of daily life. But there was also an energy here, a sense of possibility that I had never experienced anywhere else. Walking the streets of Soho, past some of the most important galleries in the world, seeing other artists dragging their portfolios from one showing to another, I felt like I was part of something bigger. But emotionally, it was my most personal work. It was a visual representation of my own story, but also the story of anyone who had ever had to choose between safety and authenticity. It was about the constraints we as a society impose on each other and the power of individual choice to reject those constraints. When I finished the paintings, I knew they were special. This wasn't just the best work I had ever done. It was my manifesto as an artist. The unveiling was on a beautiful June evening. The Holloway Foundation had invited 300 guests, major donors, important artists, museum curators, art critics. I wore a new dress I had bought for the occasion, elegant black, plus the pearl necklace my mother had given me, one of the few pieces of jewelry I had brought when I left Texas. When the fabric covering the paintings was pulled away, the room became quiet. Then, slowly, applause began. Not polite applause, but real, heartfelt appreciation. I watched people standing in front of the paintings, really studying them, pointing out details, being moved by the works. I heard conversations, not just about technique, but about meaning, about recognition, about feeling understood. "You know what I see," I said, standing up and walking to my apartment window, from where I could see the Manhattan skyline. "I see my work hanging on the walls of some of the most important buildings in the world. I see people moved to tears by things I created. I see young artists writing to me, telling me my success gave them courage to pursue their own dreams." I paused, letting my words sink in. I see myself making more money from one painting than Dad makes in 10 years. It was cruel. I knew it was cruel. But I also knew it was the only language they could understand. I needed to beat them on their terms, with numbers, with financial success, with the security they had always said art could never provide. Dad cleared his throat. "Amelia, we know we hurt you. We want to make this right. We want to be part of your life again." "That's not how this works," I said, turning away from the window. "You can't choose to come back into my life just because I'm successful now. You can't abandon me when I needed you and then show up to share the glory when I no longer need you." "Then, what can we do?" my mother asked, crying now. "How do we fix this?" This was the question I had been waiting for. This was the conversation I had rehearsed in my mind. "You want to know how to fix this?" I said. "Start by acknowledging what you did. Not, 'we were trying to protect you,' or 'we were scared.' Acknowledge that you chose your fear over your daughter's dreams. Acknowledge that you made me feel like I had to choose between family and becoming who I really was. Acknowledge that you were wrong." Silence. "We were wrong," my father finally said, his voice broken. "We were completely wrong. We should have supported you. We should have believed in you. We should have celebrated your talent, not tried to stifle it." "We were wrong," my mother echoed. "We're so sorry, Amelia. We didn't know how to be parents of an artist child. We didn't understand, and we let fear control us." These were words I had waited 4 years to hear. But now that I heard them, I realized they weren't enough. An apology was just the beginning. "An apology is the first step," I said. "But you also need to understand what you lost. You lost 4 years with your daughter. 4 years of Thanksgivings, Christmases, birthdays. You missed my first gallery showing, my first review, my first major sale. You missed some of the most important moments of my life because you chose to punish me for not conforming to your expectations." I could hear them both crying. "We know," my mother said. "We know we missed so much. We regret it every day." "Good," I said, "because regret is what you should feel. Because your choices had consequences, and those consequences don't disappear because I'm successful now. I paced around my apartment, feeling 4 years of accumulated anger and hurt pouring out. You want to know the craziest thing? I continued. It wasn't that you didn't believe I would succeed. It's that you didn't believe I deserved the chance to try. You were so afraid I might fail that you never considered I might succeed. We did consider it, my father said weakly. We just what? Thought the odds of 1 in a million were too long? So how about now? Now that I'm that 1 in a million, how do you feel? Silence. Then, unexpectedly, I started laughing. Not bitter laughter, but real, genuine laughter from deep inside. You know what the funniest thing is? I said. I've been waiting for this phone call. For 4 years, I've been imagining what I would say to you when I proved you wrong. I imagined all the ways I would make you feel small and stupid and wrong. I stopped, looking at the New York Times review hanging on my wall. But now you've called. Now I have the chance. I realize I don't need it anymore. I don't need your validation of my success. I don't need you to admit you were wrong. I already know I was right. This realization was liberating. For 4 years, I had been building toward this moment, the moment when I proved my parents wrong and forced them to acknowledge it. But now that the moment was here, I realized I had moved beyond needing their approval. So what does that mean? My mother asked. For us? For our relationship? I considered the question for a long time. It means, I finally said, that if we're going to have a relationship, it will be on my terms. It will be based on mutual respect, not on you thinking you know what's best for me. It will acknowledge that I am an adult capable of making decisions about my own life. It will include you, truly understanding and respecting my work, not just how much money it makes. I took a deep breath. It means you need to get to know who I am, not try to make me into who you want me to be. Because that person, the safe, predictable, practical person you wanted me to become, doesn't exist. Never did. You've been loving a fantasy. We want to learn, my father said. We want to understand your world, your work. We want to know you. We want, if you'll let us, my mother added, to be proud of you for the right reasons. I stood there, holding the phone, feeling the full range of emotions. Anger, yes, but also relief. Satisfaction, but also sadness for the lost years, for the relationship that could have been. I need time, I finally said. I need to see that you're serious, that this isn't just about wanting back into my life because I have money now. I need to see real change, real understanding. We understand, my mother said. We'll wait, as long as it takes. We love you, my father said, his voice hoarse. No matter what. We've always loved you, even when we showed it badly. I believed they loved me. I always had. That's what made this all so painful, knowing their rejection didn't come from lack of love, but from fear, from their own limitations, from their inability to imagine a world different from what they knew. I know you love me, I said. But love isn't enough. Love didn't support my dreams. Love didn't stop you from making me feel like I had to choose between you and my true self. Next time, if there is a next time, love needs to include trust. Trust that I know what's best for me, even when you don't understand. We'll do better, my mother promised. We'll learn. We will, my father echoed. We'll do better. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment, looking at the lights of Manhattan, processing what had just happened. For 4 years, I had been waiting for this conversation. Now that it had happened, I felt empty? No, not empty. More like clarity. Revenge, I realized, wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. It wasn't about making them feel bad, about proving they were wrong, about forcing them to admit their mistakes. Real revenge, real satisfaction was living well. It was becoming the person I had always wanted to be. It was creating meaningful art, having a career I loved, being true to myself. Their voicemail made me laugh, not because it was pathetic, but because it showed they were finally beginning to understand what they had lost. But my laughter wasn't malicious. It was the laughter of relief. I had won, not against them, but for myself. I had built the life I wanted. I had proven to myself and to the world that it was possible to choose courage over fear, passion over safety, authenticity over conformity. And most importantly, I had learned that I didn't need anyone's permission to be myself.